So hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Luttrell, and I am the Communications and Events Manager here at the Center for International Development at Harvard University. I'm really excited for today's discussion on building development careers for the 21st century. And before we get started, I do want to mention a few housekeeping items. The format for today's session is going to be a brief presentation, 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll break into a Q&A, which will last about 30 minutes. During the question and answer session, you can submit questions directly into the chat, or you can use the raise the hand functions. You can ask your questions directly to Neil. And as I've mentioned before, but for folks who are just joining, we're also recording today's session, and this recording will be available on CID's YouTube channel. I will also add links in the chat for all of our social media channels and how to sign up for our events newsletter so that you can learn more about events like this. And finally, next week, we have another CID Speaker Series, and we're featuring Amanda Beatty, who is a senior researcher at Mathematica. She will talk about a large-scale impact evaluation on community-driven development in Indonesia. So we hope that you'll register for that, and I'll also put the link to register in the chat. But without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Neil Levine. Neil is the former director of the Office of Conflict Management and Mitigation, was the former director at the U.S. Agency for International Development, as well as USAID's Center of Excellence for Democracy, Human Rights, and Governance. He chairs the board of CDA, a Cambridge-based NGO development research and action organization. He has taught at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, American University, and the National Defense University. He is also a certified professional coach with over 25 years of experience advising both individuals and groups. So we're very excited to have Neil with us here today. So Neil, thank you very much, and over to you.
Sure, thank you. And I'm just delighted to be here with you. And I have a planned opening for this talk, but I'm really as kind of the first speaker, and also just to take a minute. It's a Friday afternoon, and I'm coming to you from Beverly, Massachusetts. And I'm also speaking to you on the 19th anniversary of the attack that occurred on the trade towers. And so that's a moment when we think about international development and foreign affairs as kind of a signature moment in our history that we could call to mind. But also, as folks who are beginning their career in this area, I just want to emphasize that we're coming together in the context of kind of three crises, you know, a global pandemic and an economic recession and a reckoning in our country with a past of racism and challenges to our kind of founding ideals. That's a lot. And I just wanted to sort of start out by, can we all just take a breath here and kind of appreciate that we're in a moment that is profoundly not normal. This is a talk that comes to you at a particularly challenging time in your own personal career, but a challenging time for our country and the world. And it makes it a little different and kind of should inform how we process these. So just take a minute and breathe with me for a second. I also like to do that just to break up whatever you were doing this morning and whatever you do this afternoon to kind of bring your full presence into this discussion. I hope to not talk too long, and Sarah, do give me the high sign at, you know, when you feel we're ready to go to the Q&A, and I'll make sure that all the information comes up in one way or the other. Here's the planned opening. Why am I here? Why am I here? And why am I here? So why am I here? Simple answer. I'm honored to be addressing the Kennedy School about 30 years ago or more. I applied to 6 schools. I got into 2, was waitlisted at 2, and didn't get into 2. The Kennedy School saw fit to go in another direction, as they say. And so I'm finally here. I've made it. So that's why I'm here. Why am I here? I should say also, with great respect for the credential and the decision you made to pursue your higher education at Kennedy School, you've really taken the first step in positioning yourself for a successful field. It is a credential from an elite institution, and I say elite in its most positive sense, that will be well served both by what your experience here, the technical knowledge you gain, and the networking that should follow from being associated with the Kennedy School. So congratulations. Why am I here? Sarah talked about my biography. I would say I have a certain perspective that I want to label and caveat this discussion. It is US centered. It is from the perspective of somebody who has spent the majority of time in government in my career, but it's also been leavened by experience in the classroom, teaching in conflict and development, international relations, and in the area of strategic leadership. So experience not just with government, but in academia, and then more recently as the chair of an NGO that works in development and conflict and peace building. So just to say I have a perspective. And I'm open to challenge of that perspective. Why this topic? Why am I here? I've collected just a lot of observations about our field. It is a dynamic field, and this talk sort of says what has always been true about the skill set and the competencies needed for success, and what is changing about that skill set, and what are some of the challenges. And so I'm going to talk about really three things. One is the global trends that we face in the world today. What are some of the trends we face in the international development and peace building sector in particular? And then my theory of the case in terms of the skill set. And there are a number of places and talks and webinars where you can go deep in these global trends. I'm going to deal with those in catalog fashion. I'm going to tick them off to sort of, these are trends observed that are the topics of webinars and semester-long courses. And you're very familiar with them, I believe. Similarly, I'll talk about some of the trends that I see in the sector with a little bit more coloring in of the details, so that as professionals entering the field, you have a sense that this wasn't always this way and it's dynamic and changing, and you'll get a sense of the trends if you think about the development sector as a practice or as a business that you're going into. What's new and different about those, and how might you navigate that? And then the meat of the discussion, and I think certainly the Q&A, will be about what are those skill sets, what are those proficiencies, what are the ways to navigate in this very dynamic and changing world. So that's what we're going to talk about. I'm so glad to hear. If you were tuning in for the World Bank seminar on land tenure, you're on the wrong call. Please adjust your Zoom accordingly. Outside of the triple crisis that I talked about at the top, let me just share 8 dimensions in global trends. And I'll start out with one you've probably heard, and I'll just say it, democracy and pluralism are under assault. And I want to share with you in chat, I think, the quote from the opening paragraph of the Freedom House's State of Freedom in the World Today, just to make this point in the way experts make this point. So you can read that quote in full, but talking about democracy and pluralism are under assault. And the final sentence, and where I kind of punctuate this point, is that for the 14th straight year, more countries in the world are moving away from democracy by the leading indicators in terms of press freedoms, independence of the judiciary, and the way that Freedom House assesses the state of freedom in the world. I remember giving this speech 5 years ago, and that's right, when it was the 9th year of backsliding. But it's a continuing trend, and it animates it. What does it mean for working in international development? If you can't have access to the people, they're not free to assemble, that press and people don't move freely. That is going to be a challenge in our world. And we're developing and honing the skills for how do you work in those kind of environments, number one. The second, climate change, increasingly underscores both a threat to the planet, but also very practical and real challenges to development work, both for the effect on the environment and both species, fragile environments like rainforests, migration associated with that, and places that are livable and not livable. The global pandemic and future pandemics are thought to be a new and increasing feature of it. Climate change is also related to the number, severity, and deadliness of natural disasters, which is new from 20 years ago. The issues of equity and poverty coming to the surface. Poverty alleviation, which used to be the main point of engagement for many people in the developing world, sort of has a new face. There are more poor people living in large middle-income countries like India and China than in what we used to call sort of the developing world on an aggregate basis. Poverty exists in the developing world now in the context of deep pockets of poverty, often in conflict and fragile states. And that, so you've got this dichotomy of poor people living in big countries where our ability to influence those is less because we're a smaller actor in a bigger country, in a richer country, and in very difficult operating environments where pockets of poverty exist. Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Afghanistan and the like. So the face of poverty and the issue of equity or inclusive growth continues to be very elusive. The emergence of big power politics as another trend. As the US turns more insular and kind of under the rubric of America First, a much more transactional and inward-looking politics. There's much more to that argument, but at the same time, the US is looking inward. You have China looking outward with a very much a global long-term view of pursuing its interests, more so in a big power politics way, as opposed to a multipolar, norms-based, regulated through mediating organizations like the UN and such. And then Russia with both a regional and global set of interests that it pursues, both, I think, above board and surreptitiously, including impacts on our own country. That's new. Demographic change, a younger, robust growth of youth in the developing world and an aging population in the North. And the question for us is, for the workforce, where is the work going to be done in the future? The grain of countries like Japan, who will have a majority or a large section of their population much older, and then young countries that are majority youth. That's been happening for a long time. It means that Africa will be the source of the workforce, the largest workforce in the world. Africa as a whole will surpass China quite soon. Migration. What does it mean when upwards of 70 or 80 million people are stateless or on the move, not resident in their country? What does it mean for the losing country? What does it mean for the country in which they land? And then the final of globalization and technological changes. The world has gotten very small. The dual edges of globalization, both technological advances that bring people together, rapid sharing of information for good or for evil. Things that were, greatest cost of job loss is really not from other people coming to our country and taking our jobs. It's from technological change and things that were done by hand or done by machine. And that is what in industrialized economy is moving. What does that mean on a global basis for people working in development? So those, again, are courses that during your time, if you haven't already tasted of those are out there, things to be aware of. Let's focus now on the trends in the sector. When I was coming into the field, the biggest player in international development was official development assistance, ODA, the assistance provided by governments. That has long been surpassed by flows of direct foreign investment as the largest flows north and south. So the idea of development professionals being able to navigate with private sector actors, either working directly for the private sector in the developing world or in partnership, or at least understanding what is the role of private sector actors in development. Remittances, given the migration and immigration, large flows in the billions of dollars, always between US and Mexico, but US and Central America, but throughout the world between North and South, a flow that has only increased and become more significant with time. What does that mean for the practice of development? Philanthropic flows, the idea that a single actor like Bill Gates is now a factor in terms of planning and programming of assistance, along with official assistance. That was not a feature 20 years ago. There's always been philanthropy. There's always been charitable giving in the face of disasters. There have been remittances, but at the level and significance across the board, these are new factors for someone entering the field. And then we talked a little bit, the role of new donors. There are developing, when I entered the field, developing countries were receiving aid. Now some of those countries are giving aid abroad. You have Middle Eastern states that are donor countries in that region. China, of course, Iran, and others are now donors, and in some cases mischievous donors. The donations they give may be for backing armed rebel groups or providing social services for them. So that's sort of the new picture for aid flows. The second is, I think, if we thought that poverty alleviation was the main engagement for international development, that's become different too. The issues of conflict, fragility, disaster response, and the global impacts of climate change has made that different. And then migration. So whole careers that once might have been dedicated to alleviating poverty in such a way are really far more segmented into smaller problem sets and different problem sets in different geographies. So it's not just poverty alleviation. Whole new subsectors of development have either come into existence or have become named approaches. So people are largely concerned with the environment, the whole field of climate science, gender studies. When I was going through school, women's studies and then gender studies were either non-existent or just getting started, as was peace building. Now we have a practice in the area of development that is backed by research, literature, academics, and specializations in all these areas. That simply wasn't the case. That would include technology, the application of technology, monitoring, evaluation, and learning with the help of computerized evaluation techniques that weren't available a generation ago. And then lastly, I think one that's I'm particularly interested in the current state of this whole theme of localization is that truly is development going to move to a much more bottom-up approach than a top-down kind of northern designed and delivered enterprise? Or are we going to put our money where our mouth is and really do back and invest in the agency, voice, and results that are initiated by people from the developing world or not. And this is an engagement very close to my intellectual interest and heart as the head of CDA, and I'd love to talk to you more about that. So why are we all here? What's the theory of the case? What makes for a successful career in international development? I want to share with you my little graphic on one page where this is all gone, and I'm going to give you the link so you can consider this now or at your leisure.
Neil, I can just pop that in there if you'd like.
Would you?
Yeah, there we go.
Too much pointing and clicking.
No worries, no worries.
All right. Anyway, you'll get a graphic that looks like this, with you in the center here, and my talk all around. And on the bottom of this graphic is basically the theory of the case is 3 components to a successful career that I've observed. And one is the good news is, in one way or another, you're already pursuing the first one by going to grad school and thinking about where is the technical area of engagement that allows you to follow your passion and your gifts. And that could be in economics or public health or democracy and governance or first responding emergency, climate science or whatever. But the idea that we still will be called upon for deep subject matter expertise in one area. At the same time, we know that the complexity of the problems are probably multidisciplinary in response. So while you have a focused mindset on that choice of technical career, you have an open mindset to learning from other disciplines. And I think that's important. I'm not going to say too much about that, but I'm happy to answer in particular spheres if folks want advice in terms of public health or other things that you might do. I'm happy to answer that. I will just say, I like to say I worked in the democracy, governance, conflict, peace building part of the forest. I'm less informed about some of what some of the other what we would call backstops. The second area I think I've tried to put words to is, at the start of my career, I would say, you need foreign language skills and certain cultural competencies, and which is obvious. The work occurs largely in other places with other languages spoken. That still is a requirement, I think, for a successful career. Not exclusively, but it helps to go where the work is being done and speak in that language. But I've come to learn that it's more than just the language. It's the feel for a foreign culture and the ability to navigate successfully. It's a certain flexibility of mind and behavior, so that when you are dealing with language barriers, transportation disruptions, power outages, the failure of things to work as effectively as you'd like them, that you don't collapse in a puddle of tears or get agitated or lash out, but you're able to roll with that with a certainty that you have the confidence to make something happen with the talents you have at hand and the resources at hand. And I think people will tell you that there's a certain magic that can come together in the field that people pull together and create things even under the most dire of living circumstances. So I would say that flexibility of mind and ability to absorb a disappointment or failure and then come back. And people oftentimes call that resilience or grit. I think flexibility of mind is where I've come to rest. And then the third basket won't surprise folks, I think, is the basket of leadership and interpersonal skills. Nobody accomplishes a damn thing in this field on their own. You could be a brilliant researcher. You still have to get somebody to support and publish your work. You need somebody to share that information. There certainly are a lot of divas that you'll encounter. I would just submit that they're going to plateau. They may plateau quite nicely, but I think what I've seen is just amazingly talented people, for want of a little bit more introspection, a little bit more self-awareness, a little bit more empathy, was the difference between a satisfactory career and perhaps a great career. And the more I've been in this business, the more certainty I have, and it guided my role, my passion in moving from a Latin Americanist to a governance expert, to a peace builder, to a leadership instructor and a coach, because of my belief in that third basket of skills. Of course, the question is, how do you get those skills, particularly at this stage in your career? And we can talk about that in the Q&A. The last little graphic there is the importance of networks. It's very interesting to see. I'm totally old school when it comes to networking, and it's part of the culture in Washington. And a very interesting discussion with a colleague about the differences between Washington, and Boston about networking and the cultures of networking here. Washington thrives on networks. I joke about, passing off truisms as real knowledge. And I joked for years about saying, are we off the record here? I want to share something very sensitive. In Washington, it's all about relationships, and everyone nods their head. Well, of course it is, but how do you go about making those relationships? For young people, I think, in networking, first to assure them that overcoming that reticence, that hesitancy to talk to very important and busy people inhibits so many. I'll just tell you, don't let that stop you. What's the worst that could happen? Don't become a stalker, but, I found, and I may be an outlier in this, that as somebody who benefited from contacts and networking, for people who took the time with me, I have a responsibility to pay it forward. And so I spend a lot of time having coffee in the cafeteria of the Ronald Reagan building. I'm polar in this regard, I'm sure, but there are a lot of people who feel the same way and want to talk about, or you push the me button, they'll want to talk about themselves, they'll want to give you guidance. And it was never anything for me to say, wow, thanks for calling, haven't heard anything, but keep in touch. That was 10 seconds of my time. I'm no better or worse a person for that 10 seconds, so to come over that, and we can talk a little bit about networking. Sarah, I'm going to stop there, and kind of the floor is open to dig in on any of these topics or things that I haven't mentioned.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Neil. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or use the raise your hand function. I think that's preferable. I think we have we have a couple of questions. Okay. Carrie Ann, I will unmute you. Okay, there you go.
Hi, Mr. Levine. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciated it. I would love to hear a little bit more about your transition from government work to working at CDA and the focus on localization.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, let me talk a little bit about my earlier transition from kind of Latin Americanist to kind of technocrat to kind of leadership to coaching and development. So what I found at AID is highly technical training. I would say we're lousy with talent. We've got the best doctors, we've got the best public health experts, we have people steeped in their field. We also have, at the time, a dearth of folks whose job was leadership and management. And so when I had my first supervisory job as the head of the governance division, I thought I needed to become an expert in governance. It turned out I needed to go hire experts in governance and build a team that was highly impactful, highly effective, coherent together. And my job was to remove barriers, coach them up. And people would say, what do you do at USAID? Well, what do you do? I work at USAID. It's the foreign assistance part of it. What do you do? So, well, I work in kind of the public administration of what we do overseas. What does that mean? Said, what do you really do every day? Like when you go to your office, I coach. And I started answering it that way in 2000. So that really defined what I would be doing after that. CDA was a great opportunity that sort of landed on me. When I was as head of the conflict office, the staff introduced me to the then founding leader of CDA, Mary Anderson, who, if you don't know, was responsible for the first set of case studies done by CDA, applying the principle do no harm in the humanitarian assistance, not looking at the impact, not looking at the effect of giving aid in the context of disaster, but how that aid was received by actors on the ground and what were some of the unintended consequences. That when we intervene in that way, no matter our intentions, we become part of the political economy. And sometimes that has deleterious effects, and to be more self-conscious about that. That led to practice and information. So the team, they went from that into peace building and reflective peace processes. I found them to be just expert in think tanks. And when I moved, I relocated from this area. The then executive director recruited me to be on the board. We, in assessing what should CDA do now, what's the next set of questions that engage us, when we convened experts in this area, this issue of localization and addressing the power relationship between donor and recipient needed to be addressed in some of the same ways and lessons we found in Do No Harm and Reflecting Peace Buildings, is that focusing on the local agency of actors. The second area was collective impact, and looking in certain geographies where you have all these development actors working in the health sector or working in peace. Why doesn't it add up to more? It is a collective enterprise, peace building, but the way we carry out our work is competitive and divisive as opposed to bringing people together. There's been some work done domestically about collective impact, and we have done some preliminary research on applying those principles abroad. So that's the second area. The third area, and I see this all the time, is that a lot of the work that's been done, a lot of good practice and development remain best practices, and it occupies shelves like these, and it's not applied. And the question is, why is that? And so we're trying to think about, there's a new generation of folks that may have not been exposed to Do No Harm or reflective peace building or what we're doing in localization. What is the political economy that prevents a lot of this knowledge from being shared broadly and, most importantly, at the local level? I can tell you right away that one block is that it's all in English, or largely in English or French, Spanish. So that gives you kind of a thumbnail of CDA, my journey there, and what we're deployed in now.
Great, and I think we have another question from Kristen Hinckley.
Hi, Mr. Levine. Thank you so much for your speech. I was hoping you could speak a little bit about the tension or decision between being a generalist and a specialist. I'm actually an education student and debating how much to know about different topics versus how much to focus on one specifically.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm going to really flake on giving you a definitive answer, because I could say that everybody needs that specialization to fall back on. I think that's true. Although that wasn't, I suppose I was a Latin Americanist to start. So that does get your start. I think what you want to do is really define a focus area, but just be open to what comes along. And it has to do with the complexity of the problems that we face. And I'll give you an example. Like, one of the things that we did in the democracy office was found that, public health or education problems in that sector generally don't fail because we don't have the right technical approach. We know the epidemiology of disease. We know about, both having not just access to education, but quality education and instruction. There is technology that's shared and travels across country. What showing my colors is they tended to fall apart because of governance within those sectors. Corruption, under-teaching, and then charging folks for tutoring. And so the idea is you need that education background to know the best practice, but you also have to be alert to, okay, what are my larger problem solving skills? And isn't it all about like defining problems and then assessing solutions? I mean, that's the mindset, and you're helped amazingly by focus in a technical expertise, but it's really that open mindset and being willing to, number one, admit you don't have all the answers, and number two, being willing to go to another discipline. I am convinced that some of the most pressing problems, the solutions lie far outside of the traditional disciplines of development. And I'll give you a case of countering violent extremism. We have assessed, as conflict experts, some of the root causes. Poverty is a bedrock. It can create grievances, but grievances and the taking advantage of grievances and inflaming those grievances can have result in conflict. A lot of poor countries don't experience conflict, but the ones that do, it's not because of the poverty or the poverty alone. We have identified a series of structural drivers of conflict, but we know very, very little about the attractors, about identity formation, peer pressure, exposure to trauma. There's some folks on the call that have a deep background in psychology, I imagine, and who might be able to inform us. We have to have the humility to go to those disciplines. So to short, Kirsten, focus, yes, but be open to what lies beyond your technical expertise.
And we have one more question. Thank you, Neil, from Yihan Wang. So Yihan, if you want to ask your question.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Neil, for the speech. And I hope you could speak a little about career development in the international development field. So I know there are a couple of categories that young professionals can enter into this field. One is international organizations like World Bank, United Nations. The other category is private sectors like consulting companies such as Dalberg, ICF, etc., and also the nonprofit and the philanthropy sector. So what are the differences of doing international development in those different categories, and how does, from a career development perspective, how do we navigate those options?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It really is the next layer down from what I talked about. You've ticked off all the different openings. So the good news is there's a lot more areas to plug in besides working for official, for government, not government, philanthropies, private sector entities, international organizations. Let's start with the US is, working for the USAID requires US citizenship. I don't know how many of you on the call that now excludes. If you are a resident in a country where USAID works, you can work either in that host country where aid is resident, or you can work in a third country where aid is also resident. So you could be Filipino working in Indonesia, or the reverse. The reverse is true. My experience in the UN is that it's harder for Americans to get work at the UN. The skill set, I think, is the same. So in terms of your question, that technical skills, the language and interpersonal skills, and those three things, technical skills, language, and interpersonal skills, I still think are important. But what I would add to that is the catch-22 that many folks, field experience. People, have you done this before? And so, again, you're aided by the fact there are a lot of different kinds of entities there. I generally ask is, if you have an opportunity to use your language skills and immerse yourself in a country, it's really that adding to your classroom knowledge with experience, either domestically or internationally. Programs like Harvard's, I'm sure, and in the leading organizations do have practicums as sort of a first step to get you, what is it like to actually execute a mission for a firm? And I think the advice at this stage is, while you're in school, to make that part of, you know, experiential learning part of your education. As you emerge from school, what is your strategy if you don't have international experience, how to get it? That is kind of one of the tougher nuts to crack, because who's going to give you that experience if you can't demonstrate that experience? That's where networking comes in. And I'll give you my theory of networking. Theory of networking goes like this. It's got to be dense, it's got to be dynamic, it's got to be diverse, and it's got to be dynamic. Dense means more is better. The more people you know, the more, if you think about a system and you are sending impulses into the system and listening for feedback, the more dense it is, the more contacts you have, the more dynamic it's going to be. It has to be diverse in that you have more networks than you recognize. My networks span from professional networks to family networks to college and high school friend networks, to my parents' networks, to summer camp networks. I was on a professional call with another coach, and said offline in the chat, "Are you the person who went to summer camp on the Eastern Shore in the 70s? We had lunch a month later and now we're working together." So don't take any network opportunity for granted. Dynamic, the more you have, the more you are on the phone, sending messages in and listening for feedback, the more information carries to you.
Got you. Thank you so much. This is very helpful advice. Thank you.
Great. And also, speaking of networking, if you are a current Harvard student, at all of the CID Speaker Series, you have the opportunity for small group discussions with the speaker after the event. So please remember that networking is important and that you have the opportunity to do that here at the CID Speaker Series. And I'll put the link in the chat for being able to utilize these opportunities. And I think we had one more question coming in. Lucia, are you still here? Okay, great. If you want to ask your question, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for this amazing presentation. I am from Venezuela, and I have like this debate on my mind. I would really love to work with poverty and but I think my ideologies I do not share. So what do you recommend in a situation as mine, where to like attack the poverty in Venezuela but not being in the government?
Okay, you cut out a little bit, but let me repeat what I got and correct me if I'm wrong. You said you are committed, you're in Venezuela, you are committed to development within Venezuela, but you have let's say a problematic government and government situation, and you see your role outside. And how do you do that? Is that?
Yes, exactly. What I was wondering if there's possibility outside government of helping people in poverty without having to be within government, but maybe private sector or nonprofits.
Yeah.
Is it feasible?
Absolutely, and I so appreciate the question, and I just, my heart breaks for Venezuela right now. I have, from that same summer camp, good friends who are living through that. I have a friend, a dear friend who used to work in the Foreign Service under previous governments, and his services are no longer welcome now for the entire, he basically lost his career by a government he could not serve. So I know folks who are similarly situated. And first, I would just want to send a message of solidarity for folks who are caught up and don't have the government that they deserve, number one. Number two, the good news is there are many, you have the Venezuelan opposition and folks who are trying to do the best they can under extreme circumstances, and that are finding their voice. You could say that they're finding too many voices, and that's been part of the problem. But I appreciate that. I think what is different is that people will say, when I say, first of all, looking at democracy promotion and development, there's so much bad news. What's the good news? The good news has been the rebirth or the firing up of an international civil society movement that is globally wired and connected and supportive of both sharing lessons, of sending financial support, and offering solidarity. So those groups do exist, both at the grassroots level and at the international level. I think, you know, in putting my coaching hat on, you know, what I would do with folks is identify who is doing what, both at the locally, and because it's a difficult working environment, who's doing work internationally, who can sort of throw a protective umbrella around groups doing this work. And AID is one place. I don't know how involved the Europeans are. Certainly the private sector is involved. I did have a chance to travel to Venezuela now near maybe 17, 18 years ago, when this crisis was still in its early stages, I guess. The church, the private sector, the opposition, all are footholds for that kind of work. And so I know that's a general answer, but it's a dynamic society and it's still under change.
Great, thank you. And I said that was our last question, but we do have one more. So I want to be conscious of everyone's time, but we'll take this one last question and then we'll wrap up this series. So Anas Salam, you had put something in the chat. Would you like me to ask that for you?
Hello?
Hello?
Yes. Can I comment on something?
Is this Anas or Rodolfo? Oh,
yes.
You wanted to make a comment. Sure,
yes.
please.
Yes. I mean, I would like to hear some comment about the importance of educating the local, because I think if we don't create a fertile ground in the recipient, it would be difficult to expect any good harvest.
Yeah, if I heard correctly, you're more about what we mean from how do we engage with local actors to be more effective? Is that the sense of it?
Yeah, it's not only engaging with them, is improving somehow and in an intelligent way their education.
Yeah.
I don't think that is often included in this process.
Yeah, this is an interesting debate. I think there, there is a feeling, and I think it comes back from the most early work in development, that education is foundational and sort of the silver bullet. And how do you get anywhere without first, you know, an educated populace? At the same time, you know, that education is first and foremost the responsibility of the local government to provide for the health and education of their people. It's hard for an international actor to assume that role. We have a struggle to even do it effectively here in the United States with the wealth that we have. What international folks have done is give plenty of money, as does the World Bank, to large education sector. The other side is that there is kind of a very inherent belief in local knowledge that we don't adequately respect or engage. And I think, you know, this might not be a satisfactory answer because it sort of ends up being it depends on the context. I know I've just been introduced to a group that is doing work in indigenous communities in Haiti. And I say indigenous communities only because they are Creole speaking, French is a second language, they are outside of Port-au-Prince, and yet they have a highly effective education program for building on what's there already, and doing teacher training and education reform quite successfully. I think maybe the answer lies in what we would call the bright spots. There are places that are tremendously resource poor and challenged with high rates of illiteracy, yet there's some educational success. And one practice of international donors is, rather than a top-down designed foreign curriculum and program, is that we start at the bottom and find examples of these bright spots or positive deviants where despite all odds you've had success. What are the success factors in those cases? And that we look to first understand and then invest and expand in those situations. I hope that was responsive to your question.
Well, but I think that identifying the locals that are, you know, more receptive and we have some, they can understand what you're doing, and then they can somehow in their own way spray the concept. You know, I think it's a very important issue that in order to that you try to get on that these people become your collaborator, your supporter, and they are somehow find a way to transmit. If you are able to connect with them properly, they can transmit in their own way what your intention are and what the purpose of the mission.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. One just brief comment, just a resource. On the CDA website, there's a new blog series where we dip into the question, Rodolfo, about who is your local counterpart. And it's a new blog series called From Where I Stand. And it's our effort to, in their own words, allow local leaders to express what that means. You know, what does localization mean?
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all for your participation. We do have, I know I said it was the last one, but so from Anas would like me to ask this question from Egypt. We'll try and keep comments brief. We just have 5 minutes left. So the question is that in Egypt, they have a lot of challenges in the development sector, and this person is interested in making some more efficient impact than they've seen previously. And what is your advice on if they would like to study innovation in development to fit the solution for their particular country situation?
Yeah, this is really interesting and should be kind of one of the trends about innovation, which is a great buzzword, and it means all things to all people. More and more, I think there are opportunities where we have sort of turned development thinking on its head to sort of say, rather than script, what is the problem, let's say in Egypt, or delivering water, quality education, health solutions, we'll script the problem as access, and then we'll script the solution, put it in a scope of work and let a contract. That's development that was done the same way in the 1950s. What increasingly we're experimenting with, or we're at AID, was to say, use all that brain power in AID to script the problem, to sort of say, here in Egypt, we have problems of access, we have problems of distribution, whatever the issue is, here's the environment, here are some of the things that we'd like to see happen, and then turn it out to solver communities. This is the challenge. And then have them propose what makes sense given the local context or given what has succeeded elsewhere. I'll give you an example. One of the things was, the problem was, how can we intervene early to save lives at birth and the problem of maternal mortality. What are the best solutions? We have, 30 years of practice and studies, and folks have evaluated projects. But what can we do? What practices from the worldwide community of medical practice should be available for the finely scoped problem of intervening within those first 48 hours of life for better health outcomes? This was called a grand challenge and put out. And then from that, we decided to invest. What were the approaches? I won't be able to recall what they were. I won't give you the third act of the play. But to Asna, I think that more increasingly to look for opportunities where they are looking for solutions and innovations and opening up from not the traditional partners to provide that. And I know, again, specifically, I would explore with the aid mission in Egypt there to find out who's doing this kind of work.
Well, if I might, very short, one of the most important things that I learned during my time at the Kennedy School was the relevance of understanding the context, because if you understand the context, then you can have a way of penetrating the local society and understand their problem, and probably be able to come up with solutions that are feasible for them.
Yeah.
So
I think the context of the bells ringing in the background is our indicator of time.
It is. So thank you all so very much. I will again put in the chat information to subscribe to our newsletter or to register for next week's talk. So thank you, Neil, and thank you everyone for joining, and we hope to see you next week. Great, and we'll see you soon.